I never liked the idea of walking through the woods alone, but I found myself there one gloomy afternoon. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches reaching out like fingers. I had always heard stories about these wood show people went in and never came out. They called it the Whispering Woods. As I stepped onto the narrow path, the air felt heavy. I could hear the leaves rustling, but it wasn't just the wind. It sounded like whispers, soft and faint. I paused, trying to listen, but the voices faded away. Just the wind, I told myself, pushing forward. The deeper I walked, the thicker the trees became. The sunlight barely reached the ground, creating a gloomy atmosphere. I started to feel uneasy. Every now and then, I would catch glimpses of shadows moving between the trunks, but whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. Suddenly, I heard a clear voice, female, gentle but filled with despair. "Help me," it called, echoing through the trees. My heart raced. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. I hesitated, feeling a strange pull toward the sound. Maybe someone needs help, I thought, despite my fear. I followed the voice, stepping off the path and into the dense underbrush. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like a cold mist. "Help me," it called again, more urgent this time. I pushed through the branches, my curiosity overpowering my fear. As I walked deeper into the woods, the shadows seemed to close in around me. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, each one begging for help. "Help us. Save us," they cried, their tones filled with sadness and desperation. I stumbled into a small clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. In the center stood an old, twisted tree, its bark gnarled and dark. At the base of the tree, I saw a figure, a girl, pale and ghostly, with long hair covering her face. "Please, help Mum," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you need?" "I am trapped here," she said, lifting her head slightly. Her eyes were hollow, filled with pain. "I cannot leave this place. You must free me." I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. "How can I help you?" I asked, stepping closer. "The tree holds my spirit. You must break the curse that binds me," she said, her voice growing weaker. "But be careful. The woods will try to keep you here." Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, almost angry. Shadows shifted around me, and I could feel a presence closing in. "Leave now," a voice roared from the darkness. "You do not belong here." Fear gripped me, but I couldn't turn away. "I can't leave you," I shouted at the girl, but she shook her head sadly. "You must save yourself. If you stay, you will become like me." The shadows pressed closer, and I could feel the air thickening, making it hard to breathe. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, pushing through the underbrush, branches scratching at my arms. The whispers screamed behind me, angry and desperate. "Help us! Don't leave us!" they cried, but I forced myself to keep going. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, drowning out their voices. Finally, I burst back onto the path, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the woods, the sunlight blinding me. I stumbled into the open, feeling the warmth on my skin, and I collapsed on the ground. Looking back at the dark trees, I could still hear the whispers faintly calling, "Help us! Help us!" But I knew I couldn't go back. I had escaped, but the woods would always be there, waiting for someone else to wander in. I've always loved exploring old places, so when I heard about Hologrovea Forest rumored to be haunted, knew I had to check it out. My friends, Lily and Ben, were curious too, so we planned a day trip. The stories about the grove intrigued us. They said people had seen ghostly figures wandering among the trees and heard strange sounds echoing in the night. As we arrived, the sun was high in the sky, and the grove looked beautiful, with sunlight filtering through the leaves. But there was an unsettling feeling in the air, a heaviness that made me uneasy. We set off down a narrow path, surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. After a while, we came across an old cabin hidden among the trees. Its windows were shattered, and vines crawled up the walls. "Let's check it out," Ben suggested, and Lily nodded eagerly. I hesitated but followed them inside. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with dust and cobwebs. As we explored, we found old furniture covered with sheets and faded photographs hanging crookedly on the walls. One picture caught my eye. A group of people standing outside the cabin, their faces frozen in time. They looked happy, but something about the way they were staring made my skin crawl. "Let's get out of here," I said, feeling a chill. But Lily and Ben wanted to look around a bit longer. As I stepped outside, I heard a whisper behind me. "Stay, stay." It sent shivers down my spine. I turned back, but Ben and Lily were busy examining an old trunk in the corner. Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaky. It sounded like someone wants us to stay. They laughed it off, saying it was just the wind. But I felt a knot in my stomach. We left the cabin and continued down the path, but the atmosphere had changed. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around us. I glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see a figure in the window. Instead, it was just shadows. As we walked, I started to hear whispers again, soft at first, but growing louder. "Help us, help you us." They surrounded us, echoing through the trees. "What is that?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with fear. I grabbed her arm, feeling panic rise. "Let's go back," I urged, but Ben was determined to find out where the whispers were coming from. "What if someone needs our help?" he insisted. Before I could argue, he pushed ahead, and we reluctantly followed. The whispers led us deeper into the grove, away from the path. The trees were thicker here, and the shadows felt alive, shifting and swirling around us. "Help us," the voices called, pulling us further in. My heart raced. "This is a bad idea," I said, but Ben kept going, drawn by the haunting sounds. Finally, we stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood a large, gnarled tree, its bark twisted and dark. The whispers grew frantic, swirling around us. "Help us! Help us!" they cried. I looked around, feeling like we were surrounded by something unseen. Suddenly, a figure appeared by the tree, a woman in a tattered dress, her face pale and sorrowful. "Please, you must help us," she begged, reaching out toward us. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am trapped here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We were lost in these woods, and now our spirits are bound to this place. You must break the curse." I felt a mix of fear and sympathy. "How can we help you?" I asked, but the shadows around us seemed to grow darker, swirling in anger. "Leave. You do not belong here," they hissed, their voices echoing through the grove. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Lily and Ben's hands. We turned to flee, but the shadows closed in, blocking our path. "Help us! Save us!" the voices cried, filled with despair. We pushed through the darkness, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. "No, don't leave us!" the woman cried, her voice filled with anguish. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I knew we couldn't stay. We finally broke free from the shadows, bursting back onto the path we had first walked. The sunlight felt blinding, and we ran until we reached the edge of the grove, gasping for breath. As we stumbled out into the open, I looked back at the trees. I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, a haunting reminder of the spirits trapped in Hollow Grove. We knew we could never return, but the memory of that day would stay with us forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the woods. I always loved hiking, so when my friend Sarah invited me to explore a nearby forest, I couldn't resist. We drove to the edge of the woods, where towering trees loomed over us, their branches twisting like fingers in the sky. The air felt cool and crisp, filled with the earthy smell of damp leaves. As we began our hike, everything seemed normal. We chatted and laughed, admiring the beauty of nature around us. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The sunlight barely broke through the thick canopy above, and the air grew heavier. "Do you feel that?" I asked Sarah, suddenly uneasy. She nodded, glancing around. "It feels different in here," she said softly. I shivered, but we pressed on, hoping it was just our imaginations. As we walked, I noticed strange markings on the tree symbols carved into the bark, weathered by time. "What do you think these mean?" I asked, tracing my fingers over one of the carvings. Sarah shrugged, but I could see concern in her eyes. "Maybe they're old signs from a long time ago," she suggested, trying to lighten the mood. After a while, we stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in moss and vines. "This is creepy," Sarah said, taking a step back. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Let's not stay here too long," I agreed. As we turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper in the air. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, looking around. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. It sounded like someone. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part was drawn to the sound. "We should check it out," I suggested. "What if someone really needs help?" Sarah hesitated, but after a moment, she agreed. We followed the whispers deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around us, and the path became harder to see. The air felt thick, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around us. "Help us! Help us!" they pleaded. Suddenly, the ground beneath us shifted, and we stumbled, nearly falling. We exchanged worried glances, realizing we might be in over our heads. "Maybe we should turn back," Sarah said, her voice shaking, but I felt a strange pull, as if something was guiding us forward. As we pushed through the underbrush, we reached another clearing. This one was darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the ground. In the center stood a tall, twisted tree, its trunk gnarled and blackened. The whispers intensified, echoing around us. "Help us! Save us!" they cried, sounding desperate. "What do they want?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I felt a surge of fear, but I also felt compelled to understand. "Maybe they're trapped," I said, stepping closer to the tree. "We need to help them." As I reached out to touch the trunk, the whispers grew frantic. "No, don't touch it," Sarah shouted, pulling me back. I looked at her, confusion in my eyes. "But they need us." Suddenly, the shadows around the tree shifted, forming dark figures that loomed closer. "You shouldn't have come here," one of them hissed, its voice cold and chilling. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "We need to leave," I yelled, panic setting in. We turned to run, but the shadows moved faster, blocking our path. "Help us! Help us!" they called, their voices filled with sorrow. I felt tears prick my eyes. "We can't help them!" I cried out, my heart racing. Just then, I caught a glimpse of something in the darkness, a pale face, eyes filled with anguish. "You must break the curse," the figure pleaded. "You can't leave us here." But the shadows pressed in, their grasp tightening around us. In that moment, I realized the truth. The whispers were the souls of those who had come before us, trapped forever in the woods. "We have to go," I shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand. We pushed through the darkness, fear propelling us forward. Finally, we broke free from the shadows, bursting back onto the path we had first walked. The sunlight felt blinding after the darkness, and we ran as fast as we could until we reached the car. Breathless and terrified, we jumped in and locked the doors. As we drove away, I glanced back at the woods. I could still hear the whispers in my mind, a haunting reminder of what we had encountered. The forest would always be there, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in, but I knew we would never return.